on every commercial airplane in the world is rounded. Not oval by accident, not round for style. Round because, once, square cost lives. Nobody boarding a flight today thinks twice about the shape of the window they are looking out of. It is just there, a small rounded pane, the same on every aircraft from every manufacturer, on every airline, in every country. It feels like something that was never any other way. It was. And the story of why it changed involves one of the most celebrated aircraft ever built, a string of catastrophic disasters within a single year, and an engineering mistake so subtle that some of the best aviation minds in the world completely missed it, until people had already died finding it for them. This is the history of the airplane window. Long before anyone was worrying about jet cabins, windows on aircraft and ships had already quietly settled on a rounded shape, almost by instinct rather than calculation. Flying boats and ocean liners in the early 20th century used small, round portholes, partly for structural simplicity, partly because a circular opening was easier to seal against water and wind. Nobody thought of this as a safety innovation. It was simply the practical shape for a hole cut into a curved metal hull that occasionally met rough seas or rough weather. Early passenger aircraft, flying low and slow, propeller-driven and unpressurized, did not have this problem to worry about at all. Their cabins were not sealed against the outside air the way a jet cabin would be. Passengers simply breathed the same air as the sky around them, at altitudes low enough that this was perfectly survivable, if a little cold. Because the cabin was never pressurized, the fuselage was never repeatedly stressed the way a modern jet would be, and window shape was, structurally speaking, almost irrelevant. Designers were free to choose windows based purely on appearance and passenger comfort. That freedom would not last. In the early 1950s, the Havilland Comet was the most advanced passenger aircraft on Earth. Built in Britain, it was the world's first commercial jetliner, and it looked the part. Sleek, fast, and pressurized to fly higher than propeller aircraft ever could. The Comet let passengers cruise above the turbulent weather that made older flights bumpy and exhausting. Newspapers called it a marvel. Airlines scrambled to order it. For a brief moment, Britain led the entire world in jet aviation, ahead of the Americans, ahead of everyone. Part of what made the Comet feel so modern was its cabin. Engineers designed it with large rectangular windows, generous panes that gave passengers a wide, unbroken view of the sky, something that felt luxurious compared to the small, round portholes of older aircraft. It was a deliberate design choice, made for comfort and appearance, a way of making jet travel feel like the future had arrived. Nobody involved believed it was dangerous. Nobody had any reason to. Pressurized jet cabins were so new that almost no one on Earth had the experience to know what thousands of pressurization cycles would eventually do to a piece of curved metal with sharp corners cut into it. They were about to learn, in the worst possible way. The trouble began quietly, with a crash that at first seemed unrelated to the aircraft's design at all. In 1953, a Comet broke apart during a violent storm shortly after takeoff from Calcutta. Investigators at the time attributed it largely to the severe weather conditions, a tragic but seemingly explainable loss. Then, in January 1954, a second Comet broke apart in mid-air over the Mediterranean Sea, in clear weather, shortly after takeoff, killing everyone on board. This time, there was no storm to blame. Investigators grounded the fleet, searched for a cause, found nothing conclusive, and eventually allowed the aircraft to fly again, believing the problem had been something isolated and fixable. 3 months later, A third comet broke apart in almost the same way, over almost the same stretch of sea. This time, there was no explaining it away. The fleet was grounded again, this time for good, and investigators launched one of the most extensive and expensive air accident investigations the world had ever seen. Engineers recovered wreckage from the ocean floor, piece by piece, reassembling the fuselage almost like a jigsaw puzzle laid out across an aircraft hangar. They needed to understand something that had never been fully understood before. What happens to a pressurized aircraft cabin after thousands of flights, thousands of takeoffs, thousands of cycles of expanding under pressure at altitude and contracting again on the ground? What they found reshaped aviation engineering permanently. To find the answer, investigators built something almost absurd in scale: a massive water tank at an aerodynamics research facility in England, large enough to submerge an entire Comet fuselage. Engineers lowered a full aircraft body into the tank and began repeatedly pressurizing and depressurizing it underwater, simulating, in rapid succession, the exact cycle of stress the aircraft experienced on every single flight. Climb after climb, descent after descent, compressed into a fraction of the time it would normally take. It was, in effect, an attempt to age an aircraft artificially, forcing years of wear onto a single test airframe in a matter of weeks, hunting for the exact point where it would fail. The work was slow, painstaking, and in its own way, deeply uncomfortable for the people doing it. Every cycle brought investigators closer to reproducing, deliberately and on purpose, the exact failure that had already killed dozens of real passengers. Engineers were not simply solving an abstract technical puzzle. Newspapers were running photographs of grieving families at the same time. Laboratories were flooding fuselages with water, and everyone involved understood that whatever they found would either vindicate an aircraft the public had already begun to fear, or condemn it entirely. Eventually, after enough simulated cycles, the tank test aircraft failed, and when engineers examined where the fatal crack had begun, they found their answer in one of the corners of a window frame, in exactly the kind of location that, until that moment, nobody had thought to treat as a weak point at all. Every time an aircraft climbs to altitude, its cabin is pressurized, essentially inflating slightly, like a balloon, so passengers can breathe comfortably at heights where the outside air is too thin. Every time it descends, that pressure releases, and the cabin contracts again. Over the life of an aircraft, this repeats thousands of times, a constant, invisible cycle of expansion and contraction across the entire metal skin of the fuselage. Metal under repeated stress does not fail evenly. It fails at weak points, at places where stress concentrates instead of spreading out smoothly. Think of tearing a piece of paper. A clean edge resists tearing fairly well, but the moment there is a small notch or a sharp corner, the tear starts there almost every time and travels outward from that single point. Metal behaves the same way under repeated stress, just far more slowly, invisibly, one cycle at a time. The Comet's windows were rectangular, with distinct corners, and those corners, engineers discovered, acted almost like a starting point for cracks that most materials would otherwise resist. Every pressurization cycle placed enormous, repeated stress precisely at those corners. Over time, invisible fatigue cracks began to form in the metal, expanding a tiny amount with every flight, completely undetectable during routine inspection, until one day, one crack finally grew large enough that the fuselage could no longer withstand the pressure, and the aircraft failed catastrophically, all at once, thousands of feet in the air. It was not a single flaw, and not a manufacturing error in the traditional sense. It was physics, quietly working against a shape nobody had thought to question, hidden behind metal that looked, from the outside, completely fine. The fix, once discovered, was almost deceptively simple. Round the corners. Or better yet, eliminate them completely. A circular or oval shape distributes stress evenly around its entire edge. There is no single point where force concentrates more than anywhere else. No natural starting line for a crack to begin. Engineers already understood this principle in other fields, in pipes, in pressure vessels, in industrial tanks. But it had never been applied with this level of urgency to the windows of a passenger aircraft, because nobody building the Comet had understood just how severely repeated high-altitude pressurization could punish a sharp corner over thousands of cycles. Aircraft manufacturers rebuilt their designs around this discovery almost immediately. The rectangular windows disappeared from new aircraft. In their place came the rounded, oval-shaped windows that have appeared on every commercial jetliner built since, regardless of manufacturer, regardless of country, regardless of decade. It became not a stylistic preference, but an unquestioned engineering standard, baked so deeply into aviation design that most people alive today have never seen a square airplane window, and would likely assume one had simply never existed. The Comet disasters did more than change the shape of a window. They changed how the entire aviation industry thought about metal fatigue, a term that, before these crashes, was barely discussed outside of specialized engineering circles. Investigators realized that an aircraft could pass every existing safety test, look structurally sound by every standard available at the time, and still be quietly accumulating invisible damage with every single flight, damage that no inspection method available in the 1950s could reliably detect before it became catastrophic. This realization led directly to permanent new testing methods across the entire industry, not just for one aircraft, but as a standard requirement for every future jetliner ever certified. The de Havilland Comet itself never fully recovered its reputation. It was redesigned, relaunched, and continued flying for years afterward. But by then, American manufacturers had used the delay to develop their own jetliners, ultimately dominating the market Britain had briefly led. A single design decision, one nobody thought twice about, had shifted the entire balance of the commercial aviation industry, handing global leadership in jet travel to a different country, almost by accident. Once engineers understood that sharp corners were the hidden enemy of a pressurized aircraft, they did not stop at windows. Every opening in a modern aircraft fuselage, doors, cargo hatches, even small maintenance panels, is now designed with rounded corners as a fundamental rule, not a stylistic afterthought. The logic that once applied only to a passenger's view of the sky now governs almost every hole cut into an aircraft's skin. Aircraft manufacturers also changed how they tested aircraft altogether. Where the Comet had been certified using the engineering standards of its time, standards that had never been pushed to the limit by a fully pressurized jet, flying so high, so fast and so often. Later aircraft were subjected to full-scale fatigue testing as a standard part of certification. Entire fuselages cycled tens of thousands of times through artificial pressurization to intentionally hunt for exactly the kind of hidden weakness that had gone unnoticed in the Comet before a single paying passenger ever stepped aboard. In a strange way, the industry began deliberately trying to break aircraft on the ground so that they would not break by accident in the air. Beyond the window itself, the Comet inquiry left behind something almost as important as the fix, a method. Before the Comet, there was no real established playbook for reconstructing a shattered aircraft from ocean wreckage in order to trace a failure back to its origin. Investigators effectively invented the process as they went, recovering thousands of fragments from the seabed, cataloguing each one, and physically rebuilding the fuselage's skeleton piece by piece inside a hangar, cross-referencing damage patterns until the pattern of destruction itself pointed backward to a single point of origin. It was slow, exhausting, and at the time, unprecedented in its scale and rigor. That approach became the template for how serious aviation disasters would be investigated for decades afterward. Recover everything possible, reconstruct methodically, and let the physical evidence itself lead to the answer, rather than relying on assumption or theory. Later generations of investigators would have far more tools available to them, but the underlying discipline, patient, exhaustive, evidence-first reconstruction, traces directly back to the hangars where broken pieces of the Havilland Comet were slowly pieced back together in the mid-1950s. The rounded shape was only the first lesson the comet disasters taught the industry. In the decades since, the window itself has continued to change in ways passengers rarely notice. Modern aircraft windows are not made of ordinary glass at all, but of layered acrylic panes, lightweight, resistant to shattering, and far better suited to withstanding the pressure difference between a warm, pressurized cabin and the extreme cold and thin air just inches away on the other side of the fuselage. Most aircraft windows are actually built from 2 or 3 separate panes, with a small, deliberate breather hole in the inner layer, allowing pressure to equalize between the layers, so that only the outer pane bears the full structural load, while the inner pane serves mostly as a backup and a barrier for passengers. More recently, some aircraft have gone even further, replacing physical window shades with electronically dimmable glass, allowing passengers to darken their window at the touch of a button rather than pulling down a plastic shade. A small comfort feature built on top of nearly 70 years of lessons about exactly how much stress a small opening or in a pressurized fuselage can safely endure. There is a small irony in all of this. The window that nearly brought down an entire aircraft manufacturer is also, to this day, the single most requested seat on any commercial flight. Airlines have known for decades that window seats are consistently preferred over aisle or middle seats, and researchers who study passenger behavior generally point to the same handful of reasons: a sense of control over the view, something to lean against, and simply the psychological comfort of being able to see the world outside rather than only the seat back in front of you. None of that comfort exists without a hole cut into the fuselage, and none of that hole is safe without the specific rounded shape an entire industry was forced to learn the hard way. It is a strange kind of full circle. The feature passengers value most, the connection to the sky outside, is also the feature that once quietly threatened to tear a jet apart, until engineers discovered that the shape of comfort and the shape of safety, it turned out, could be the same curve after all. Look at any commercial aircraft today, from any airline, anywhere in the world, and you will see the same small rounded window, repeated dozens of times along the fuselage. It has become so standard that it barely registers as a design choice anymore. It simply looks like what an airplane window is supposed to look like. But that shape carries the weight of one of aviation's earliest and most sobering lessons: that comfort and appearance are never the only considerations in an aircraft's design, and that the smallest, most overlooked details, a corner here, a curve there, can determine whether metal quietly holds together at 30,000 feet or does not. The next time you are seated on a plane, glance at the window beside you. Notice that it curves gently, with no sharp edges anywhere along its frame, no corner where your eye can rest and think. This is where something might begin to give way. It looks like nothing. It looks like it was always going to be that shape, the same way a stop sign always seems like it was always going to be red, or a life vest was always going to be bright yellow. Obvious in hindsight, inevitable in retrospect. It was not inevitable. It took a celebrated aircraft that briefly made an entire nation the envy of the aviation world, a string of catastrophic disasters that shook public confidence in jet travel itself, and a painstaking investigation pieced together from ocean wreckage and a fuselage submerged again and again in a giant tank of water, to arrive at a shape simple enough that, once discovered, the entire world adopted it without a second thought, and never looked back. Somewhere in that quiet curve of glass and acrylic, inches from your shoulder at 30,000 feet, is a lesson that cost lives to learn, and one that nobody flying today ever has to think about again.